So that statement, let thine eye be single and thy body will be filled with light, is a really key and important statement. You think about it, it's like, well, what does that mean? Your eye single. Well, I got two eyes. What do you do with that? Well, if you go to the Aramaic, what it said was, let your reality be focused or singular. And then if you talk to the physicist will tell you that matter is light energy solidified. So when you focus your mind energy, the reality that you hold in your mind, on one singular thing, it will be produced in the world of matter. There's been an interesting piece of work done with an Indian Swami, a fellow named, Swami Rama. And they took him into the laboratory, I believe it was at Stanford University, if I remember correctly. And they drew a circle on the back of his hand. And they did a skin biopsy in that circle. Perfectly healthy cells. He spent 30 minutes meditating. They did another skin biopsy. Cancer cells. He spent another 30 minutes in meditation. Did another skin biopsy. Not a cancer cell there. Perfectly healthy cells. What really runs this energy system? And I would add that when we look at, we had that chart in the first half. On the left-hand side was cause. On the right-hand side is effect. I would offer that the predominant resonant energy in the system governs the physiology of your system. Now, in the laboratory, they're showing us, in the cell biologist laboratory, they're showing us that, and in fact it comes from the writings of a woman named Candace Pert, who's a former head of brain bioresearch at the National Institute of Health. And Candace Pert says this, as a medical researcher, every thought you think produces a molecule in your body. And the quality of the molecule matches the quality of the thought. The molecule is called a neuropeptide. There are receptor sites in every cell for those neuropeptides. And what they're showing us in the laboratory, in the cell biologist laboratory, is that when the cell lands on the receptor site, the cell replicates the neuropeptide inside of itself, in the cellular structure. So now on a cellular level, you're living with the effect of your thoughts. If you go back into the Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount, and we go into this in depth in our workshop, Empowered to Heal, we go into that Sermon on the Mount. But the Beatitude that we're told says, blessed are they who mourn their wrongs, for they shall be comforted. Doesn't say that at all in Aramaic. What it says is that first word, blessed are they, is traditionally translated that way out of the Greek scriptures or renditions. In the Aramaic, what it says is a latent neural structure implanted by God to guide you to happiness and well-being will become your conscious possession, you who, and then each of the Beatitudes is an instruction. And the one that normally we hear translated as mourn their wrongs for they will be comforted in Aramaic says, look into their errors in thought for they will be cured of mental stress. Now you put together what the cell biologists are telling us what happens. You think a thought, it produces a molecule. The molecule lands on a receptor site and it replicates itself inside the cell. Would you say that's called mental stress? Do you think this guy knew 2,000 years ago what he was talking about on a physiological level? You better believe he knew exactly what he was talking about. You want to be cured of mental stress? You've got to look into the molecules that you put into your system that are destructive to your system. Standing in hate of someone is like drinking a poison and hoping they'll die. Because that molecule lands in your cellular structure and replicates itself and produces stresses on your system that if you don't deal with them will kill you. That's what Jesus was teaching 2,000 years ago. He was teaching people how to take charge of their own physiology. Now, when you start to take charge of that process, what you'll see is that the strongest resonating energy is what produces the result in the system. How is it? We've all heard of the fellow who went to the doctor, had a totally clean bill of health, and 6 months later got sick. They took him into the hospital, did an exploratory, sewed him up, sent him home, said, too filled with cancer, we can't do anything, you're going to die. And 3 days later he was dead. It's like, wait a minute, how is that possible? 6 months ago he was perfectly healthy. What happened? Well, if we go along in life continuously engaging in the disease of negativity, in fear, in hatred, in vengeance, in gossip, in slander, in condemnation, we're continuously putting into our cellular structure the mind energy of that, which is destructive. It literally, in the ancient languages, it was said it defiled our temple. And when we defile our temples, we're in the process of destroying it. And the minute that the predominant resonant energy shifts from one to another frequency, the whole system shifts with it. Let's say you drive the same route to the office every morning, and you're listening on your stereo, on your car stereo, to this nice, quiet FM music. You're rolling along, and the same corner, every day when you hit that corner, all of a sudden the radio station you're listening to disappears, and you've got this rock and roll noise that comes in on top of you. How many have had that experience in your car radio with the FM? Well, the way the FM, or maybe you're listening to your rock and roll noise and this quiet FM music comes in, whatever. But what happens when that takes place? Well, the tuned circuitry of an FM radio is set up in a way that only one frequency can govern the system at a time. It's not so in the AM band. You notice you can turn your AM radio on and perhaps 2 or 3 stations come in on top of each other at once. You notice that doesn't happen with FM. The circuitry's tuned so that you've got to have a certain percentage of signal strength, and that station locks in and runs the whole system. Well, in exactly the same way as if you're driving away from the station you're listening to, and let's say it takes 51% signal strength, if you go from 51 to 50 to 49, and you're driving into the field of a new station, and it goes from 49 to 50 to 51, all of a sudden, it switches stations. If we have the person whose physiology is expressing health, and they continue in the fear mode, or the anger mode, or the hatred mode, when that signal shifts and it moves and becomes the predominant resonant energy, all of a sudden the whole cellular structure starts to shift into disease. That's how someone can bring about a disease process that quickly. And so it's the focused energy. Let thine eye be single. And so if the predominant resonant energy in the system moves from health to disease, we see the system moving into disease. Now, how does miracle healing happen? Well, all you have to do is reverse the process. Unfortunately, we're not used to seeing people reverse the process. It's not unusual to hear about Joe or Harry or Bill that had a totally clean bill of health, and they're now in this terrible process, or this terrible disease has stricken them. Why do we think that to have somebody who has a disease process going on, and we hear that they've moved to health all of a sudden, is a miracle? It's not miraculous. I mean, it's miraculous in that it happens, but it follows a lawful process that we can understand. If you go back to Jesus, and you know, a lot of people want to worship the process that he did, like he was the miracle worker. But if you listen to him, he said, if I come in my own name, I'm a false prophet. And then he said what it took to be healed and to be whole. And you'll notice that when people in his field healed, he didn't say, no, look at what I did. See that? Pretty good, eh? You notice that's not what he did. What did he say? He said, your faith. In other words, where you allowed your mind to go is where your physiology went. Yes, he says, I supported you. I showed you the way. In fact, he said, I flung the door open wide that nobody can close. Now, those who are live in poverty and want to control others want to close that door. That's why they had to get rid of him. That's why they turned his teaching into religion, from law to religion. He was telling people how the creative process of life works. And he said, your faith did the healing. It wasn't about him. It was about what you do with your mind energy system. Where you allow your system to go is where your physiology is going to follow. And it doesn't matter if you're walking toward the precipice of disease and you're a day from death, a half a day, 2 hours, 2 minutes from death. If you reverse the mind energy process, you can step back and 2 minutes to 10 minutes to 2 days to 2 weeks to total health by shifting the way the energy is focused in your system. And forgiveness is a major key for how that process works. But you can't look at the effect world and believe in it and go to the cause world at the same time. You know, when we did that equation in the first half of the workshop, we had the cause world on one side of the equation. We had cause over here. We had effect over here. Now, an interesting thing in the Aramaic language is that the word cause and effect are singular in Aramaic. They're not separated. The Aramaic mind would not think of engaging in a cause without experiencing its effect. Sometimes it takes time for the effect to unfold, and so it looks like the cause and the effect aren't connected, but in Aramaic, one word represents both. And when you recognize that your creative process follows where your mind energy goes, you can't serve cause, which would be the realm of the Creator, of God, and effect, which would be the realm of matter or mammon. Remember, you cannot serve God and mammon, for you will cling to one and despise the other. So if you're looking at the effect world and letting your mind energy be sourced by the effect world, then you're worshiping the world. You're serving the world. And so you will produce a world that looks like that, and you'll be limited to that. If you give that process up and go first to the Creator, then you have the option and the opportunity to go to the cause level and no longer be stuck in the effect world. And I believe that what Jesus was telling us 2,000 years ago was that our purview, the thing that we are capable of, is to live on this side of the equation. That's where we're capable of living. But most people are stuck on this side of it, looking at what's already existing in the world and letting their mind energy be so focused in that area and therefore sourced from that area. You'll go back and you'll remember that Jesus said to people, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world? In other words, everything on this side of the equation, and lose his soul, which is that which is at cause level, on this side of the equation. What does it profit you to do that? And then, do you remember what he did after he said that? Do you know what his next act was? Take a look at it. It's an interesting thing to look at. He was talking about which world you're focused in. What does it profit you to get everything together here? You know, the purpose of life is not about he who dies with the most toys wins. And when the going gets tough, the tough go shopping. That's not what it's about. But if you're caught in that world, you can't connect with this world. And when you connect with this world, there's a whole other game in town. And immediately after he spoke of that, he stepped up the frequency of his body. Body in quotes, remember. He stepped it up. To the disciples who were watching, there was this great emission of light. And then Moses and Elijah brought down the frequencies of their so-called bodies, and the disciples could see the three of them having a conversation. I think what he was saying is, what does it profit you to get everything on this side of the equation together if you can't connect with and do what happens on this side? Like there's a whole other game in town. And when we recognize that there's a whole other game in town, in our workshop, Purpose, Personal Power, and Commitment, we go into what's the other game? How do you determine what your part is in the other level of things? But that there is another level that we are capable of living at. And we can't serve both of them. It just can't be done. And so the decision has to be made as to which direction you're going to go with that. And as you do, there are 4 stages that one will tend to go through. And those 4 stages are quite identifiable. And the 4 stages go like this. The first stage is never enough. And the person who lives in the world of never enough usually simply scrambles to get more. Well, I'll just work harder. I'll just get another job. I'll just get still another job to try and make enough money. And they never deal with the cause level in themselves, and so never catch up. It's always the game of never enough. If you recognize yourself living in the realm of never enough, and again, it doesn't just apply in the realm of money, it applies in the realm of health, in the realm of relationship, aliveness, joy, creativity, every area of life. But if you recognize any area of your life where you're living in never enough, what do you have to do if you're ever going to correct it? The requirement is to deal with the mind energy that you hold of never enough. When you deal with the mind energy of never enough, then everything's going to go. And things are going to change. And then you'll go to stage 2. And stage 2 is a stage of day late and dollar short. Anybody recognize that one? Now, that day late, dollar short mentality is another level. It's a step beyond never enough. But you look at the average person that's at day late, dollar short, and they just pray for more money. And they just work harder for more money, but they never deal with the cause level of them that creates day late, dollar short. And if you can identify with that, you might remember back to a time when, maybe you earned $50 a week. And the bills were $52. And you got paid on Saturday, the bills were due on Friday, right? And so people said, oh God, if only I could make $100 a week. So what happened? That person got to the point where they made $100 a week, right? How much were the bills? $104. Still got paid on Saturday, the bills were due on Friday. And the person who's stuck in the effect world says, oh God, please, how about if I could just make $200 a week? And what happened? They got to the point, inflation happened, prices went up, wages went up. They made $200 a week. How much are the bills now? $208. And on it goes. The week that this person who's at day late, dollar short, got a check from Dad in the mail. Dad, maybe struck it at the horses or something and sent a check for $500. This person went down to the mailbox, found a check for $500. It's like, wow, look at this world. I've got enough money to pay all my bills on time, ahead of time, and I'm going to have money left over. That's what happened in their head. But remember, it's take care of the heart, for out of it are the issues of life. What went on in their heart? Well, I had the privilege a few years ago of getting to do some work with a gentleman named Marcel Vogel. Marcel was a 23-year senior scientist from IBM. And Marcel developed instrumentation in the laboratory with which to take a picture of the high energy waves that leave the mind when we think a thought. That literally, when we hold a reality in our mind, we set up an energy wave with that reality. That reality is an energy moving in us, and motion creates a wave. Now, I like to call that high energy wave the psychic megaphone. So the person who gets the check from Dad for an extra $500, whose mind energy is at day late, dollar short, what resonates in them when they get that extra money? Well, of course, in the conscious level, it's, oh boy. But in the unconscious level, a message goes out. Hey, world, I've got an extra $500, and I'm supposed to be a day late and a dollar short. Who's going to take it? And you'll notice on the 29th of the month, the transmission fell out of the car. How much was the bill? $500. And they're right back again. We are creative beings. We will draw the circumstances that will produce exactly the results that our mentality calls for. And because the human mind, and this is a principle we go into in the Why Is This Happening to Me Again workshop, because the human mind is an evidential device, if one lives at day late, dollar short, one will only see the evidence that supports life called day late, dollar short. The abundance could drop right at this person's feet, but they won't be able to see it. Their mind will not produce the evidence. Or if it falls right into their hands. How many stories have we read about people who won the lottery, millions of dollars, and 5 years later, they were right back in the same financial condition they were in the day before they won the lottery? Why? Because we're creative beings. And if we don't get a shift in the mind energy system, we don't get a shift in the effect world, except that perhaps temporarily there will be one. So if one's at day late, dollar short, what one needs to deal with is the mind energy of day late and dollar short. Then, once one's done that, you go to the third level. And the third level is the level of just enough. Now, when one's at the level of just enough, well, you know, whatever the bills are, if the bills happen to go up, well, they'll create an extra few $100s. If the bill goes down, they'll lose a few $100s of income. They'll just kind of ride this wave evenly where, well, there's always just enough. There's never any left over, but, you know, it ends meet. And if one really is engaging in their healing process, consciously and purposely, and dealing with their mind energy system, this is usually the stage where the vitality goes up sufficiently that they reach a new depth of being able to see their old never enough and day late, dollar short energy. And so what we see is that this person holding at deeper levels, never enough and day late, dollar short, they've worked through some layers of that, and so having built their vitality, unburdened themselves, they get to just enough, then they dig in this new layer of never enough and day late, dollar short. And as that energy starts to be accessed and move out of the system, it creates effects. All of a sudden, the person who's got just enough, turn around, the bottom falls out, and they're back at poverty again. It's like, oh my God, what's wrong here? Well, understand the healing process. Nothing is wrong there. That's perfectly on target. As that energy is leaving the system, it produces an effect. The person who doesn't understand what healing looks like will tend to get trapped in that effect, take it back in, and they're right back at never enough again. As opposed to the person who understands what's happening. Again, this doesn't just occur in the realm of money. This occurs in every area of life. Whereas the person who understands says, I'm clearing out some of my deeper levels of never enough and day late, dollar short, so it creates effects in my world, but I'm not going to get lost in that effect. I'm going to look at it and say, boy, I'm glad that energy's moving out. I'm willing to go through the symptoms that are required. In the disease process, people who hold disease energies that are debilitating to them, if they're ever going to work through their debilitation, the energy of that debilitation is going to have to come up, and on the way out of the system, it's going to become expressed in their physiology, and it's going to look like perhaps a terrible disease. But if they're consciously engaging in their healing process and understanding what that's about, and we go into the healing crisis or the healing process in the Why Is This Happening to Me Again workshop, is they understand what that looks like, they keep doing their work, and that's where they have faith. That's where the faith faculty comes in. They know what the goal is, and they keep their eye on that goal rather than getting lost in the effects. There was a great psychologist, I forget what his name was, but he coined a poem that reflects that very well. And it says, as you travel through life, no matter what your goal, keep your eye upon the donut and not upon the hole. That you've got to keep your eye on where you're going and let the effects unfold in your world. But make sure that you stay connected with cause with your focus. Whatever happens in your life. And as you stay connected with cause, you will become more and more empowered and be able to dig up these old energies and move them out of your system until you arrive at that destination, which is level 4, and that is total abundance. And to deal with the mind energy of just enough is what allows you to move to that level, and clearing out each and every one of these other levels in regard to your finances, in regard to your relationships, in regard to your health, in regard to just simple aliveness and joy in life. The principle is identical in every area. So what I'd like to do now is step into an exercise that looks at some of the mind energy that perhaps you've accumulated in your life. And so what I'm going to ask you to do, whether you're on the video here or in our live audience, what I'm going to ask you to do is get into a comfortable, quiet place where you can go into kind of a meditative state. And we're going to start to touch into some of those other levels. And so I'm going to ask you to just get quiet, sit comfortably, and if you would, have a pen and paper available so that if you touch into anything significant for you, you can just make a quick note of it, just jot it down. And so allow yourself to take a deep breath. If there's any tension anywhere in your body, breathe into that tension and let it soften. And as you breathe into that tension and let it soften, I'm going to ask you to allow yourself to go into some different circumstances. The first one I'm going to invite you to do is to let yourself be in the space of total poverty. Imagine that you're living in this environment where you are absolutely poverty-stricken. The worst environment you can think of. Let yourself, in your mind's eye, be there for a few moments. Now, if you have a concern about, I don't want to go there because I might create it, we're going to invite you to go there, and part of the process will be cleaning it up. So if there's anything that resonates with it, we'll use this as an opportunity to clear it out of the system, or at least to start the process of clearing it out. So take a deep breath. Let yourself be in that place of poverty. And as you find yourself there, imagine that your parents and your siblings come to visit. How do you feel about them seeing you in this place of dire poverty? How do they feel about it? What do you say to them? What do they say to you? Are there any messages, actual or implied, that would key you into any mind energy that you hold of limitation? Any mind energy that would hold you back in your creative process? So look carefully at being visited by them in these circumstances. So you have your visit, they pack up, they're getting ready to leave. They don't know it, but as they leave, you can hear every word they're saying to each other, every thought they're thinking. Are there any messages, actual or implied, that might show you the source of some mind energy that has limited you in your life? And then a second group of visitors comes, and they're some of the early authority figures in your life. Perhaps ministers, teachers, priests, rabbi, early employers, neighbors. Those early authority figures come to visit. How do they feel about seeing you in this place of poverty? And how do you feel? What do you say to each other? Are there any messages, actual or implied, that might show you the source of some of the mind energy that has limited you in your creative process? If so, make a note of it. They leave, and then a third group of visitors comes. And these are some of your early childhood friends. Are there any messages, actual or implied, that come from your interaction with them? That would show you any possible source of mind energy that might limit you. They leave. You can hear every word they're saying, every thought they're thinking. Is there any mind energy there that you may have picked up on at any time in your life that would limit your ability to create? If so, make a note of it. And there's a place where you might want to do some worksheets or some of the other tools to clear that energy out of your system. And now as you breathe deeply, in the ancient Aramaic language, Jesus taught of an elemental force that existed in us. In Aramaic it was called Rukha. That elemental force is a force that by definition broke off the effects of error. And so what I suggest that you do at this point is, if you've uncovered anything in this poverty experience, that you invite that force into every level of your being, your genetics, your physiology, your emotions, your mind, and your soul. That any limiting energy, any energy that would defile your temple in any way, now be liberated. And allow yourself to take a deep breath and find any tensions anywhere in your system and just let them go. And as you breathe into that, let every part of you soften and let loose. In the Aramaic language, the word forgive is to cancel, to let loose, to untie. That every image, every thought, every emotion that would lock in poverty now is softened by that internal force. It is loosened and let loose from you. And that is replaced with joy and complete aliveness and abundance. In the Aramaic language, where we're told that the scriptures speak about a fall of man, in Aramaic it doesn't speak of the fall of man. What it says in Aramaic is that we forgot how to live in abundance. Ask now to be restored to your rightful place of abundance in every area of your life. And then allow this scene of poverty to just fade from your vision. And then move to a new place. And in this new place, you're in a place of mediocre. It's small, it's adequate, it's clean, it's home, but it's pretty mediocre. Allow yourself to be in that place of mediocre. And now, that first group of visitors, your early authority figures, come to visit you. And as you interact with those early authority figures, are there any messages as they see you in these mediocre surroundings? Any messages, actual or implied, that might key you into any limitation that you've bought into from them? Sometimes messages of, well, you just deserve mediocre. You'll never be able to do more. Or you've got to just stay at that standard because you're not allowed to rise above your parents. Or whatever messages might be there. Just allow them to come to awareness. Make a note of them if they're important, if there's any work to be done in that area. You spend some time with these early authority figures. You complete your visit with them. They're getting ready to leave. They don't know it, but you can hear every word they're saying. You can pick up on every thought they're thinking as they leave. Are there any messages, actual or implied, that would limit your ability to create your life in complete abundance in every area of your life? And then a second group of visitors comes, and this time it's your parents and your siblings. As they see you in these circumstances of ordinary, these circumstances of mediocrity, how do they feel? How do you feel? What do you say to each other? Are there any messages, actual or implied, that you can see might limit, might have given you some mind energy that you bought into that might limit your ability to create in your life? Breathe into it. Make a note if there's anything there. And again, remember, we're talking about messages from any aspect. Your financial life, abundance in that area. Your relationship life, abundance in that area. Your health, your aliveness, your joy. Can you see any messages there that might have locked in for you, with which you've limited your ability to create in any of those areas? If so, breathe deeply, let them soften, and let them go. And now that third group of visitors comes. And they're your early childhood friends. They come and visit you in these circumstances of mediocre. How do you feel? How do they feel about being there? What do you say to each other? Are there any messages, actual or implied? You know, any messages like, oh, well, we're glad you stayed in the same realm as the rest of us. Or how dare you outdo us? Or why haven't you done so well? Or we knew you'd never do so well. Or are there any messages, actual or implied, that come from your interaction with those early childhood friends that you can see might have impacted the way you've created your life? If so, breathe deeply into your structure, let it soften, and let it go. Once again, invite that power. Now, that power was called Rukha. It's been translated from the Aramaic language as the Holy Spirit in the scriptures we normally see. But in the Aramaic language, there's no disembodied spirit being that's referred to. This Holy Spirit, this Rukha in Aramaic, is an actual elemental force in our minds that if we invite it to go to work in us, will change our minds. That it's a power capable of processing and changing those energies that we hold within us. The denial of that force is what leaves us in unforgiveness. Because in our own minds, we don't have the processing power to change that. So it's important to invite that force in rather than deny it access to your mind. It knows exactly how to process you through whatever your limitation is, if you're willing to stop holding on, and if you're willing to truly let go of whatever it is you're holding on to. It will shift it and bring it to perfection for you. Without that force, there is no forgiveness possible. So let yourself breathe deeply into any of the thoughts and feelings that come from these mediocre surroundings that have placed you in mediocrity in any area in your life, if you found yourself there. Let them soften and let them go. And now move into a third area. This time we're going to invite you to go to absolute and total abundance. I mean, you've got opulence this time. The front foyer is 10,000 square feet. There's $1 million in Rembrandts on the walls of the foyer. You're sitting back in your library. It's a magnificent library. The only library in the country that even comes close to it, and it's a second by a long shot, is the Library of Congress. It's such a library. So you're sitting in these opulent surroundings, leisurely doing some reading, and the butler shows in your parents and siblings. How do you feel about being there as your parents and siblings come in? How do they feel about seeing you there? Are there any messages, actual or implied, that come from them that you might see would limit your ability to create opulence? Are there any messages? If so, breathe deeply, make a note of them if they're important ones to work on. And your parents and siblings are now getting ready to leave. And you've got a gift for each of them. Watch very carefully how they receive this gift. It may tell you a lot about the mind energy you have of receiving. You reach into the desk drawer and you hand them each a set of keys for their new Mercedes. How does your mother receive it? How does your father receive it? How do each of your siblings receive that key that you hand to them? Is there any mind energy about receiving that you can see has rubbed off on you from their way of receiving that would inhibit your ability to receive abundance? Remember that in the Aramaic, the fall was not a fall. It says in Aramaic, we forgot how to live in abundance. We forgot how to live out of our connected space to our source and appreciate what comes out of that connectedness. At workshop I told you about earlier, there was a woman at that workshop that came up to me afterward and told me about a friend in her life that had been dealing with some abundance issues. And just stay with this opulence for a few minutes. She'd been dealing with abundance issues, and she'd asked her friend for some help. And her friend was really looking for guidance on how to help her. And that night she had a dream. And in her dream, God took her into this huge warehouse. It went as far as the eye could see. And stacked from floor to ceiling on every square foot of every aisle of this warehouse were these beautifully wrapped gifts and presents. And she turned to God and she said, God, why are you showing me this? And God said, this is the warehouse where I store all the gifts that my children have asked me for and then refused delivery when I went to give them to them. Notice how your parents and your siblings receive. And see if there's anything in yourself to clean up about receiving. So your parents and your siblings leave with their new Mercedes. And then that second group of visitors comes. This time it's the early authority figures. Again, you're leisurely reading and the butler shows them in. How do they feel about seeing you in these circumstances? How do you feel about being there? What do you say to each other? Are there any messages, actual or implied? I'm amazed at how many people the message they get is, oh, you must have done something illegal to have this. Are there any messages about your abundance that came from these early authority figures? If so, make a note of it. And it gives you a key as to where to do some of your work. You have your visit with them. They're getting ready to go. You reach into the drawer once again. Watch how they receive. You hand them each a set of keys for their new Mercedes. How do they feel about receiving it? Are they able to receive it? Is there anything about receiving that you've learned from any of these early authority figures that you might want to change in you? So those visitors leave. They drive off in the new Mercedes. And then the third group of visitors comes. Those early childhood friends. How do they feel about the butler showing them in to your library, where in leisure and luxury you're reading? What do they say to you? What do you say to them? Are there any messages, actual or implied, that come from your interaction with them in these surroundings that would key you into anywhere that you may have bought into the mind energy of limitation in your creative process? If so, make a note of it. Breathe deeply. And then, these early childhood friends are getting ready to receive. Once again, you reach into the drawer. You've got a gift for each of them. Watch how they receive it as you hand them a set of keys for their new Mercedes. How do they feel about receiving that? Is there anything about receiving and the way that they do it that might have impacted the way you receive in your life? If so, make a note of where that work is to be done. Those early childhood friends leave. And now you breathe deeply, and once again, anything that you've touched into, anything in you on any level that would limit your ability to create total abundance in your life, you now invite that higher power into that part of you. That power that in Aramaic was called Rukha, that elemental force that breaks off the effect of our errors. As you breathe into it and let it soften and let it go, you now find yourself back in your own home, in your own surroundings. You decide to go down to the mailbox. And as you go down to the mailbox, you reach in and you get the mail, and you notice there's an envelope there, and the return address is the millionaire. And your name's on the envelope. Actually see that envelope in your hands as you take it out of the mailbox. You open it up, and in the envelope, made out to you, is a check for $1 million in gold. The equivalent of about $300 million in paper money. It's yours. Notice how you feel about receiving that. Is there a place in you to receive that kind of abundance? If not, ask to be shown what in you needs to be undone to create a space for that to be received. You see, to receive something in your life, you have to be able to conceive of it. It's interesting how many people give birth to experiences in their lives, and they never know who the father of the experience was. And so you look at that and you receive it. Now I'm going to invite you to reach for your paper and pen. And with this $300 million, $100 million in gold, I'm going to invite you to make a list of 10 things in your life that you're going to do differently. What are 10 things in your life that are going to change? And I'm going to ask you to make that list now. If you're at home watching this video, you might want to pause it for a few minutes or just go ahead and let it run through and make that list of 10 things that are going to change. And let them change as you breathe deeply. Is everybody breathing as you make that list? If you're not, I invite you to look at how you hold your breath as a way of shutting down. You know, every energy system has a switch, and the switch for the human mind energy system is the breath. Where you stop breathing is where you lock things down. And so, as you make this list, let yourself breathe deeply and freely. And now, if you haven't finished your list, I'll invite you to go ahead and take the time to finish your list. But as you look at the things that are going to change in your life, what I'm going to invite you to do now is to change those things anyway. And start to look at what is it in you that would limit you from doing those things on the level of cause. Well, you might say, well, I don't have $100 million in gold. Well, right. But remember, the level where you're a creator isn't in mammon, isn't in the realm of gold. The level where you're a creator is in the realm where you exist as a created spiritual being that has the capacity to originate mind energy. And so I'm going to invite you to start creating those things now in your life on the level of cause. And yes, there may be an incubation period, but this will unfold as you create it and as you give it energy. Now remember, you can't create it on the level where you're a creator and be mesmerized and hypnotized by what's going on in the world where maybe there's lack. Because if you're mesmerized by that, you're hypnotized by that. And if you're hypnotized by that, you'll keep creating it because that's where your mind is. That's where your treasure is. You remember the Master said, seek ye first the kingdom of God. Don't look in the world of rust and moth. Don't look in the world where thieves come. Because that's not where you're a creator. That's not where your power lies. Look in the world where you're a creator. What did he say? Seek ye first the kingdom of God. That wasn't mystical. That wasn't religious. He was saying, you, human being, you, magnificent creation of the Creator, have the capacity to go to cause. You know, one of the books that was left out of the Bible is the book of Thomas. And I think maybe because there was a little too much truth in it for them to handle. But at one point, Jesus laments that how this magnificent creature called a human being could possibly be living in the dire poverty circumstances that they live in, the emotional, the relationship, the spiritual, the physical poverty. How is that possible? And he gave the key. He said, you got to look first for your connection to your source. Because if you don't have your connection to your source, you can't produce the results that you want. So you've got to start to act as if you're there. Does that mean, well, okay, I'll go out and buy the new $50,000 car tomorrow? Well, no, I don't have $10 in the bank, but I'm going to go buy the $50,000 car. No, it doesn't mean that. Spend it where you've got it. Create it on the level of cause. Start to see yourself in the space of abundance. And then start to live your life so that you spend of your abundance in the realm of the world. In other words, back up your creatorship with where you put your time, your intelligence, your money, and your energy. You look at how people put their time, intelligence, money, and energy into toys and forget all about supporting their spiritual growth. What you'll find is the principle that was given in the Scriptures was that you had to tithe. Oh, here comes the pitch for money. No, it's not about money. Tithing isn't about money. That's one part of it, but that's really a small part of it. Yes, it makes sense to invest in your spiritual process and what supports your spiritual process at a level of 10%. But more important than that is to do it with all of your resources. I use the acronym T.I.M.E, time. You've got to arrange your life so that 10% of your time is spent in the realm of creatorship, in supporting your spiritual development, in seeking the kingdom of God. Oh, well, Michael, I can't do that. I've got 2 jobs. I have to work 18 hours a day. 10% would be 2.4 hours a day. How could I possibly do that? I can't. Well, I know when I first came in touch with this type of thinking, I had 3 businesses. I had 60 employees. I worked about 18 hours a day, 9 days a week. It wasn't possible. I now spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in this process. As you start to reorganize your life and you look at what's really important, you'll invest in what's important. And your development as a spiritual being is important. Your intelligence, your own original intelligence has to go there. Not my intelligence, yours, has to be applied to your spiritual development. Your money, yes. Your finances and your energy. Your alive, vital energy. Not at the end of the day, I go home and I'm going to have a nap. I mean, meditate for a couple of hours. You are a divine creative being created in the image and likeness of the Creator. I join with you in being that and living that at every moment in your life. And I appreciate the opportunity to share this time with you.